So hello everyone and welcome to the University College Cork Study of Religions research seminar. This is our first one for this academic year. So Dr. Aaron J. French has kindly agreed to kick us off for this year, and Dr. French teaches in the Religious Studies program at the University of Erfurt. He specialises in the history of science, modernity, Western esotericism, German Romanticism, and science and technology studies. His dissertation focused on disenchanting and re-enchanting German modernity, with emphasis on the German intellectuals Max Weber and Rudolf Steiner. His current research focuses on how three architects in Central Europe during the first half of the 20th century, Bruno Taut, Rudolf Steiner, and Le Corbusier, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, sought to redefine and reimagine sacredness and sacred spaces for the modern world. So Aaron is going to speak to us about the magic of technology, Rudolf Steiner's Rosicrucianism, and the UFO phenomenon. So I will pass it over to you.
Great. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here to speak about this. I'm going to see if I can manage to share my slideshow here. Oh, maybe it's like this. Okay. So
yes.
we see it okay, and then I will also do this. We still see?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Then I will go ahead and begin. Yeah, so first of all, thank you to Dr. Jenny Butler for the invitation, and also to Cork. I was there at a conference recently, and I really enjoyed it. So it's a lot of fun to be returning in my light body to give this presentation for the research seminar. This talk was actually originally intended for the recent Trans States conference that took place last week. And so this is a kind of extended version of that talk. But that particular conference was a bit different, or an experimental in context, in that it brought together scholars and practitioners. So the way I constructed this presentation is a bit more geared toward that sort of an audience, maybe a little bit more of a public audience in mind also. But I also just want to emphasize that the UFO subject in general, the way I want us to think about it is that it has the ability to sort of bring us as moderns living in this modern world into a kind of state of liminality, just the sheer sort of engagement with this phenomenon. And so in that sense, I wanted to just thank two of my colleagues who have kind of inspired me to go in this direction with this research. The first is Diana Pasulka. Her recent book, American Cosmic, really helped me sort of frame UFO phenomenon and religious studies and sort of bring them together in an important way. And also another colleague of mine, Hussein Ali Agrama, he wrote a recent article suggesting that the UFO phenomenon can help us, can challenge narratives of secularity and also post-secularity, and help us sort of think about the narratives of disenchantment and secularity in a new way. So I'm indebted to both of them for their research, and I'm sort of following it up here. So in that sense, this is a bit experimental in what I'm doing here. And I just wanted to say that I'm not trying to criticize or endorse here, but rather present a picture for us to think about, as well as to highlight the importance of esotericism for the history of science. And I also think that this will help us, can help us think about certain elements of our current moment, particularly in the sense of transformation and technology. Excuse me. So to begin, just a few important background moments in ufology for people who aren't familiar. The term Foo Fighters was originally used by Allied aircraft pilots in World War II to describe unidentified flying objects, metallic spheres, balls of light that they witnessed over the skies, over the European and over Europe and over the Pacific Ocean. Then there is the Roswell event, which is also quite famous in 1947, where a farmer apparently found a some strange crashed object on his land, and it was reported in the newspaper and caused a big sensation, and then was later said to be some kind of government balloon or something. And so this is an important moment in the history of ufology, which leads to what I'm going to get to today. Also, Project Blue Book. This was a secret project to study UFOs during the middle of the 20th century, conducted by the United States Air Force. It was organized to determine whether or not UFOs, whatever they were, posed a threat to national security of the United States, and also to scientifically analyze the phenomenon, attempt to. And finally, Area 51 is a nice thing I want to bring in, a nice part of this history. And Area 51 is a highly classified remote government base. Primarily, its primary purpose is unknown, but most likely it's used for development and testing of experimental aircraft and weapon systems. On June 25th of 2013, following a Freedom of Information Act request filed in 2005, the CIA finally publicly acknowledged the existence of the base for the first time. And here you see the front page of the Roswell incident about flying saucer on a ranch in Roswell. So I want to talk now about our current situation with UFOs, or what are now being called UAPs. There was a story that was published in the New York Times, which I am showing you here, written by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. This article revealed a secret program called ATIP, which stands for Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And it talked about how this was being funded in a sort of off the books way, or in a sort of secretive way, by the Pentagon. And it had been going on for some time to study what it was calling UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. But this story began a massive public engagement with the UFOs in the public spotlight again, also with this new name, this UAP. And with this article was released videos that revealing that the Pentagon had been tasked with studying videos that had been given to them by the military, by the Navy, and this is just one of the videos that was released with this article. But this was part of a larger kind of movement, a group of individuals that I show you here. One of them, who according to the article ran this ATIP program, was the former U.S. Army counterintelligence special agent Lou Elizondo. And he was connected to some other individuals who started something called the To the Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge, who is the guitarist of Blink-182, the rock band, as well as other former and current government employees. And the aim of this group and these people was ostensibly to study what they called exotic materials or metamaterials, materials that had been somehow constructed or found that did not seem to be of natural origin or natural design, let's say. But they wanted to test these materials for analysis, but it also had the caveat that it could be intended use for aerospace design as well as advanced technology, possibly even with military capabilities. So this went on for several years. The story sort of being in the media this way, until recently a book was published. This book here, called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, which revealed that this ATIP program was in fact, this book, in connection with some other documents that had been released through FOIA requests, revealed that the ATIP was a nickname for a larger program called the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program, or OSAP. And this program was in fact intended to study all forms of paranormal activity, especially at the infamous Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, which is famously a kind of hotbed for this sort of activity. But the program operated under the guise of working on new forms of military technology. So it wasn't specifically stated or known that it was actually studying these paranormal phenomena. And it was written by James Lukatsky, who, with the help of Senator Harry Reid, who also was involved in this program. And the whole story is sort of laid out in this book that I show you here. And this caused an interesting moment especially this other image I'm showing here, a show that had been following this story and having lots of influence about the UFO, about ATIP. And after the publication of this book, the host of this show had a kind of I don't know, moment of doubt or something, doubting the whole existence of this information and the truth of these stories that he'd been reporting on concerning the UFO. And they released this video called the UFO Lie: Shocking Truth of Pentagon OSAP Program. And so in this one, he second guesses the authenticity of this whole thing, and he seems to be quite shocked that they were actually studying not just UFOs or UAPs, but all sorts of psychic and paranormal phenomena. But so that's the backstory there. But it really doesn't matter because, the result was a massive new public engagement with the UFO phenomenon. Especially in regards to things like the National Defense Authorization Act. And so there's been meetings in Washington recently to discuss this problem, to see whether it is a problem. For example, inside next year's Senate Intelligence Authorization Bill is the following sentence, quote, "Cross-domain transmedium threats to United States national security are expanding exponentially," end quote. So this cross-domain transmedium threats is interesting phraseology there. And the National Defense Authorization Act has another clause, a provision for unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, that establishes an office to carry out the mission currently performed by the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force and submit an annual report on unidentified aerial phenomena. So in other words, Congress, Department of Defense, and Pentagon are taking UFOs very seriously now, and even suggesting that whatever these things are, they may not be man-made, as you can see in this headline here at the bottom. But I want to touch on a particular thread in this that I found interesting, and I'm going to connect to esotericism and Hynek and Steiner. This is Wisconsin Representative Mike Gallagher, who recently appeared on a couple of podcasts or interviews, and also this article was written. And here he suggests that, and this is just from this year, that UFOs might in fact be us more evolved in the future, using a kind of advanced technology to travel backwards in time to interact with ourselves in the past. So in other words, this is extremely relevant topic, this ufology thing, and that's why I wanted to bring you to show you this background. And that's also this thread about UFOs or extraterrestrials or whatever being us from the future is also something I would like to pick up on now. And the way that I wanted to approach this, because as you can see, it's relevant, very topical, very relevant currently. But I thought I would go back into the history more and look. And so I thought I would look at one of the most pivotal figures in this history, especially in the United States, or predominantly in the United States, but had much larger reach than that actually. And this is J. Allen Hynek. So there's a picture of him there. Hynek was born under Halley's Comet the first time it came. He was a professional astronomer. He worked at several prominent observatories at universities in the United States. During the war, he helped to develop the top secret proximity fuse, which is a sort of testing of rockets. He also worked originally with something called Project Sign, which was the program that later became this Project Blue Book that I mentioned at the beginning. He also worked on developing technologies to, well, track the activity of he observed the activity of stars and had a kind of influence in this direction. But also he was brought in again during the war, during the space race, to help the government track satellites in space. And this is around the time of Sputnik and everything. And there's a picture here of a UFO fleet filmed by Navy officer Delbert Newhouse in 1952 that Hynek believed was sort of a smoking gun of evidence that he had compiled through Project Blue Book at the time, that there was something worth studying here. So he worked on Blue Book, classifying many cases, though, as weather phenomenon. But he also took many cases seriously and classified some as unidentifiable. However, in the famous UFO sighting case in the 1960s, in a particular one, Hynek publicly suggested that the witnesses was likely had only seen swamp gas, which caused a media hysteria, the fact that he sort of publicly kind of dismissed it this way. But however, this turned him into something of a UFO celebrity. But this whole thing led to a scientific commission on the reality of UFOs called the Colorado Project. But the commission concluded that UFOs posed no threat to national security, and Project Blue Book was disbanded. However, Hynek apparently felt liberated by this, no longer being confined to the restrictions of the Air Force, who had exerted pressure to just make the sightings that were increasingly being reported, just to make them go away. He later founded his own research center to study UFOs and published several books on the subject. So during this period, he met someone who I want to talk about named Dr. Jacques Vallée. Perhaps you've heard of him. Vallée met Hynek when he was a grad student. Vallée was from France originally. And together they've worked together for a long time. They formed a lifelong friendship, in fact. And together they were instrumental in sort of shifting the interpretation of this UFO phenomenon. And they developed something called the interdimensional hypothesis, which takes the interpretation of UFO experiences to encounters with physical objects or spaceships from other planets or something, to perhaps being beings or phenomena from other dimensions instead. So during the 70s, they were part of a secret group of scientists who were working out theories like this and interested in the UFO phenomenon. And Hynek dubbed this group the Invisible College. And so you can see some of the books that Vallée has published here, including this Invisible College book that tells the story of this group of scientists. Religious studies scholar Jeffrey Kripal, in his book Authors of the Impossible, argues that such an idea, that is of a separate dimension existing alongside us, or that phenomena perhaps appears in or out of, that we interact with or observe. Kripal argued that this idea began with spiritualism and interest in the so-called fourth dimension during the 19th century, but then moved into a kind of later phase through Hynek and through Vallée, and perhaps through Hynek in ufology. So another thread that they developed, which I don't have time to go into here, but which is relevant, is the idea of mind and machine technology, that there's this sort of spiritual or mental connection to the technology itself. It's also important, but I leave that aside for a moment. So Hynek and esotericism. In an interview in 1993, Vallée reported the following, quote, "As a young student, I must have been 18 or 19 when I first became interested. I was really looking for information about traditions, and I became aware of the fact that science didn't just come out of the imagination of a few people, that there was a tradition of research that went very far back, and that at some period in history had actually gone underground. I was looking for information about that, and it led me to the Rosicrucian tradition." His interviewer says, "I was surprised to learn that Dr. Hynek was also a member for a number of years." Vallée responds, "Yes, I was delighted to learn that he had for many years gotten information from the tradition as well. We both came to the same conclusion, by the way, that we really didn't need an organization to continue this research, as there were many sources around and that kind of research was best done independently. But those organizations were very sincere and gave us a start," end quote. So Jacques Vallée and his friend and mentor, J. Allen Hynek, were both interested in and were trained in elements of Rosicrucianism. In my opinion, this simultaneous interest in both science and esotericism, in fact, helped the UFO phenomenon to be better understood from a more serious and scientific perspective. But how far does this influence go? According to the ufologist Jerome Clark, Hynek reportedly once told him that elementals or nature spirits were the cause of the UFO phenomenon. Another UFO researcher, Linda Moulton, claimed that Hynek told her to read the book Theosophy by the esotericist philosopher Rudolf Steiner, that it was a most important book. And John Franch, in his article The Secret Life of J. Allen Hynek, writes, quote, "It is easy to question the veracity of Clark's startling claim, but it makes sense when one realizes that Hynek was strongly influenced by Rudolf Steiner. In Steiner's view, elementals, spirits of air, earth, water, and the ether, dwelled in this hidden realm inaccessible to the senses. If Hynek did indeed believe that UFOs were nature spirits, he may have specifically identified them with this last class of elemental, the etheric beings of the higher elements," end quote. And as you can see, this is the picture of Steiner. Steiner also was quite interested in the fourth dimension, and here's his book that he gave a series of lectures, which was later published in a book here in German, The Fourth Dimension, Mathematics and Reality. And Steiner believed that this fourth dimension was connected to astral space, or the world of ideas and images, but of living ideas and living images, not dead. These images became dead in three-dimensional space, he said. And in this so-called fourth dimension kind of transcends time as well and exists in all times and sort of it's extra temporal. And this is a drawing on the front of the book that I put there that he drew on a blackboard to kind of show how this fourth dimension somehow projects into reality and becomes becomes less alive as it moves into our reality. But Steiner and many other esotericists from this time claim to be able to read in kind of a different library, a non-physical library that, coming out of the tradition of theosophy, was called the Akashic Record. So Steiner also claimed to do this, and he said that it was through this fourth dimension that one could gain access to being able to read the so-called Akashic Record. And I just want to touch back again to Diana Pasulka's work, who I mentioned at the beginning, the author of American Cosmic. She gave a very interesting lecture also on ufology and Rosicrucianism at a recent conference. And she was introduced to the idea of what she's calling post three-dimensional archives. So this is sort of secret archives or non-physical archives that certain individuals, scientists, mystics, esotericists somehow have claimed to gain a kind of access to. And it is interesting that Steiner did believe this, that he said there was a kind of anti-space or counter space through which one could enter into this information field that he called the Akashic Records. And he said that, these things could be visualized from the fourth dimension. And he also gave a number of lectures on astronomy in particular. And then Steiner did so much that I haven't, and Hynek also was quite a busy person, so I haven't read deep enough to see even if there's some connections here, but it's quite possible. But in fact, Hynek had been interested in esotericism from a young age. As a teenager, he saved up to buy a copy of Manly P. Hall's Secret Teaching of All Ages, which you see in the center here. And even his friends at the time found this strange that he would spend so much money on a big esoteric book. Recently, over the past years, Jacques Vallée has been publishing his own diaries that he'd written during this time, which reveal a great deal and are quite interesting. He recounts the following story from 1966. Vallée and Hynek are driving together after speaking about the UFO subject at a conference, and Hynek reveals why he became interested in becoming a scientist. Quote, "So many people get into science looking for power, or for a chance to make some big discovery that will put their name into history books. For me, the challenge was to find out the very limitations of science, the places where it broke down, the phenomena it didn't explain. I had a great deal of time reading about esoteric subjects, but of course I wouldn't say any of this to my colleagues. They would think I'm crazy. But as a student, I read everything I could find about the Rosicrucian and the Hermetic philosophers. Among the Hermetic philosophers, I was very impressed with Max Heindel when I was younger until I started reading the works of Manly P. Hall. Eventually, that led me to Rudolf Steiner, who I believe is the deepest of the group," end quote. So this deepest of the group part is important. Later, in a diary passage from 1978, Vallée reports the following, quote, "Alan and I had a long talk as we sat down by each other next to the pool this afternoon about our common interest in Rosicrucian philosophy. Alan told me he continued to have the highest regard for the theories of Rudolf Steiner," end quote. And again, in 1981, Hynek told Vallée that what really interests him, quote, "is Rudolf Steiner, the precursor, and building new models for science," end quote. In the year leading up to his death in 1986, Vallée reports that Hynek asked his wife Mimi to read passages of Rudolf Steiner to him, which I think is interesting that he didn't ask for passages of some religious text like the Bible or something, but in fact, what passages of Steiner read to him as he was um, nearing death. When Hynek died, just a month after the appearance of Halley's Comet again, second time, this is a quote here from a recent biography, I don't know if you could see it, of Hynek called The Close Encounters Man by Mark O'Connell. It's a very good book, very informative. Quote from this book, he says, "Respecting my father's wishes, we did not cremate him, Hynek, for 3 days, which is a Rosicrucian belief." And so that's a quote that the author got from Hynek's son, that they didn't cremating him for 3 days because of holding to a Rosicrucian tradition. And going back to Vallée, following his death, Vallée wrote the following in one of his diaries. Mimi, that's Alan's husband, said he had requested that she entrust me with his private Rosicrucian archives. She also gave me the Steiners, the Heindels, written in the pompous language of occultism of the 30s. Some of these volumes were studiously annotated by the young astronomer. When I read his annotations in Rudolf Steiner's Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, his favorite bedside book, he owned 2 copies heavily marked up in color pen, I feel that some of our dialogue continues. And he mentions one quote here from this Knowledge of Higher Worlds book that Hynek underlined, which reads, this is from Steiner now, provide yourself moments of inner tranquility and learn in these moments to distinguish the essential from the non-essential. It is just these moments of seclusion, when used in the right way, which imbue one with strength to perform his daily tasks. Our aim in these moments must be to contemplate and judge our experiences and actions as if they were those of others, end quote. And Hynek says, on that level, Vallée writes, on that level, Hynek, was wise, sharp, and critical. He was a soul on the very edge of initiation, end quote. And for anyone who has read Knowledge of Higher Worlds, what Steiner is talking about in this section is he gives meditation practices to achieve what he calls higher cognition, higher organs of cognition that are able to see and whatever, the spiritual world, the Akashic records, this 4th dimension. And one of the exercises he gives is to how to detach yourself from your physical body, from your life. And he has you imagine, thinking about yourself as someone else, being detached from your own emotion, your own experiences. In fact, he says viewing them as you might view like a neighbor, what's something happening to you, but viewing it as though it was happening to a neighbor with the same kind of dispassionate focus and detachment. So I think we're okay on time. So it's very interesting then that clearly Hynek was thinking about such exercises and sort of using them to guide his guide whatever kind of path, spiritual, scientific, or whatever we would want to label it. Clearly, these kind of exercises informed it in some way. So, what I now want to move more into Steiner. So, there's some background just to show you that indeed Hynek and Steiner had an interesting. There's an interesting connection there worth following up on. That's what I would like to do here, looking at it from Steiner's work. So, another one of Steiner's books that Hynek also read from the very beginning as a teenager when he was buying these esoteric books was something called Occult Science, a book called Occult Science. In this book, Steiner develops an esoteric cosmology based on theosophy and the idea of spiritual science. In this system, our planet, is evolving, culminating in a future incarnation of this planet that he calls Vulcan. And this is a graph that Steiner drew, a diagram really, that shows the different stages of the planetary incarnations as it evolves, starting with what he calls Saturn and ending with Vulcan, which you can see on the one side there. And of course, in Steiner's cosmology here, each one of these incarnations develops some kind of quality or um, some kind of spiritual quality. And this is why he has in German, but he has justice is developing, truth, beauty, and morality are also developing it within human beings at different phases here. But here's a quote from Steiner about Vulcan. He says, quote, the last planet that can still be counted in the series of earthly transformations, which follows Venus, is called Vulcan in occult science. The provisional goal of human development will be reached on this planet. The state of consciousness into which man enters here is called godliness or spiritual consciousness. Not much can be said publicly about life on this planet, end quote. So there's a lecture that he gave called A Picture of Earth Evolution. He gave this in 1921. So this is actually really a crucial lecture that I think it's one of the only places that I've found so far where he frames it in this way, which I'm going to tell you about now. He gave it in 1921. He died in 1925. So he's been doing this for a while. So it's a more later period kind of Steiner who's saying this. So in this lecture, he says, we have to look to the stars. Quote, we can begin to understand man in his real being only when we relate him to the whole universe. If we ask, what is the man in his true nature? Then we must look upwards from earth to what is beyond the earth, end quote. He talks about the substances of the minerals, the mineral material reality. He says that the mineral substances with their many colors, which in my reading also means the technological, of course, he says that this only came into existence and became part of the human form during the Earth period, which is the current period in his cosmology, specifically in connection with the exit of the moon from the Earth, which is a whole sort of other story. But he says that the human has become human only by virtue of gravity. So later in this lecture, he then says that there are super earthly beings that are already here. And here's an important quote here. It's kind of long. Quote, "Now, an event of great significance came to pass at the end of the 70s of the last century," that'd be 19th century. "Since the end of the 70s of the last century, other beings, not of a human order," and in the German he just says not human, "they have been descending to the earth for the purpose of their further development. From cosmic realms beyond the earth, they come down to the earth and enter into a definite relationship with human beings. Since the 80s of the 19th century, super earthly beings have been seeking to enter the sphere of earth existence. Just as the Vulcan men were the last to come down to earth, so now Vulcan beings are actually coming into the realm of earthly existence. Super earthly beings are already here, and the fact that we are able to have a connected body of spiritual science at all, meaning his sort of philosophy, his cosmology, the fact that they can have this at all, he says, is due to the circumstance that beings from beyond the earth are bringing these messages from the spiritual world down into earth existence." End quote. But he says humans must recognize them. Here's another quote from Steiner. "Generally speaking, what is the attitude adopted by the human race? The human race is behaving, if I may put it so shabbily, to these beings who are appearing from the cosmos and coming down, slowly by degrees it is true, to the earth. The human race does not concern itself with them. It ignores their existence. It is this which will plunge the earth into tragic conditions, for in the course of the next centuries more and more spiritual beings will be among us, beings whose language we ought to understand. I repeat then that since the last third of the 19th century, spiritual beings from the cosmos have been coming into our own sphere of existence." End quote. And what's interesting is they've translated this as human race here, but Steiner actually uses an interesting word here. He uses Menschengeschlecht, which is it's not Rasse or any word like this. It's an old sort of archaic word, which really has more to do with genealogical lineage, or the totality of a people that is very large in an ancient family descending from a common progenitor. So it's a kind of genealogical lineage that he's commenting on. And it's this genealogical lineage that is today the modern human. And these are the ones, he says, are ignoring these other beings coming here from the cosmos. Of course, the bringers of the Dawn book, the teachings of the Pleiadians from 1992, says something similar, that aliens are using mediums to try and gift humans with special information so that they don't make a horrible mess of the planet. Hynek also connected other forms of psychic and paranormal and channeling phenomenon with the UFO phenomenon as well. For example, in his endorsement of Dorothy Wilkinson Izat, who was a medium who had visions of and could apparently manifest unusual light phenomena, and also received messages from these light beings. But to conclude with Steiner again, here's a final quote from Steiner from that lecture. "We are speaking of concrete fact when we say spiritual beings are seeking to come down into earth existence and not to be willingly received. Catastrophe after catastrophe must ensue, and earthly life will fall at length into social chaos if opposition is maintained in human existence to the advent of these beings. They desire nothing else than to be the advance guards of what will happen here in earth existence." End quote. So this whole thing is actually a very interesting trope within the ufology, history of ufology, the ufology movement, whatever we want to call it. It's in fact a common trope that there are these, the UFOs are perhaps one explanation is that they're us evolved some other state in the future. So in Steiner is also saying this, that there are these Vulcan beings, which are us evolved, visiting us from the future. So my question is, did Hynek suspect that UFOs were Steiner's Vulcan beings streaming down to Earth? Some aspects of the phenomenon, explanations of the UFO phenomenon that were developed by Vallée, do involve the idea of reverse incarnation, or a future advanced technology projected back into the present, perhaps from another dimension. So I think it's possible that Hynek was also sympathetic with such a view. But where did I learn about this lecture from? I just want to mention this, that, Steiner gave many lectures, wrote several books. This is the only lecture I found where he seems to be talking about something that sounds like what you would find in the UFO literature. And I actually learned about this lecture from a group, an anthroposophical group in New Mexico, and who sort of live in New Mexico, but also are anthroposophists. And I think it's interesting that this connection with New Mexico and Roswell, which has a huge UFO presence and history, UFO culture there, that it's here that they were reading this lecture and thinking about anthroposophy and ufology. And the one of the members of this group, she's an artist and she's also a writer, and she wrote a play called The Occult Southwest, where she talks about Steiner and UFOs and so forth. And this is some of her artwork here. Um, and she also claims to be in contact with these kinds of beings that are also giving her information, also in contact with Steiner. And I just wanted to show these images that they're quite good, in my opinion, of you can see the strong anthroposophical themes, but also this UFO element present. So I just wanted to show you that. But this is where I want to go now is about Rosicrucianism and ufology. So Steiner claimed to be a Rosicrucian. He was in Germany, sort of connecting to this whole history of Rosicrucianism, which is, of course, a central piece in the history of esotericism. So what do we see here in this image? Well, this image with not with the eye, but the other one there. This is the title page of the Fama Fraternitatis, which was published in 1614, and it shows the invisible college of the Rose Cross fraternity. And what you see around it are these letters with wings that are flying in all directions, giving reports and asking to join this invisible college. But the invisible college is not stationary. If you look at it, it's on wheels, and so it's mobile. It doesn't stay at one place, but it travels around. And you can see that there's technology sort of as it being a major part of it. There's a sort of system of pulleys here. If in the windows there, if you look, you see scientists in there working, making experiments, calculations, doing astronomy. So some of this technology at the time was very advanced. And you also see strange beings in the sky, lights and so forth. So Kreipel has pointed out again that even though Hynek referred to the Royal Society in an article he wrote for the FBI Bulletin about the creation of an invisible college, the one he helped create in the 70s to study UFOs, what Hynek really had in mind was the Rosicrucians, was the invisible college of the Rosicrucians, which was a modern day mystery school, which is exactly what Steiner said too. And if this book over here is written by an anthroposophist, used to be the secretary of the society called Rudolf Steiner, and the founding of the new mysteries, that somehow these people are creating a new mystery school for modern times. And this new mystery school is a combination of science and religion. This is kind of the central tenet of this Rosicrucian thread here. I think that's all I wanted to say. Yes, for this part. So what does it mean, Steiner, Hynek, and Rosicrucianism? Well, I've just given some words here, just giving you some of my thoughts here to kind of take away from this. One is about the connection between science and religion, that this conflict narrative that we sometimes get about science and religion, to me, more and more, the more I study scientists, many who are interested in esoteric phenomena, and you see, or esoteric currents, you see that this conflict narrative seems more and more untenable. Another important part is the idea of taking exotic phenomena more seriously. That it's like in Hynek's case, and also others, that there's this idea that there are phenomena that aren't easily explainable, and then rather than dismissing these things, we should be taking them seriously and studying them. Another takeaway is the idea of technology itself as having an enchanted quality, and that matter can also be seen as can perform a kind of magic, even as it through technology, that is matter, seems to dematerialize and rematerialize. I want us to think about new perceptual horizons. And I think science needs to do this, and it does need to take exotic phenomena, quote unquote, exotic phenomena more seriously. And that, in my opinion, someone like Hynek was working in this direction, and it's important for us to revisit his ideas and to think about the direction he was trying to go in his work with the UFO phenomena, just as an example. And finally, it also gives us a way to potentially overcome certain Western biases that still exist in the narrative of a secular modernity, of a modernity that has emerged in primarily in Europe to begin with, and sort of outgrown a superstitious past in which the cosmos was alive with experiences and beings that, from a modern quote unquote secular quote unquote scientific framework, uh, can only be classified as something like mental illness, really, or just as sort of a false perception or something like that, somehow a fraudulent or an error, if not mental illness. But it also points to the deceptive, magical side of technology, as I mentioned. And for the Trans States Conference, where I was presenting this, part of the theme of that conference was about deception and trickery. So that's why I framed it also this way, about thinking about the deceptive and magical nature of this whole body of information, this whole UFO slash esoteric history and conversation going on that I wanted to highlight here. That this whole thing is itself deceptive and magical somehow, but it involves technology, and this technology is shrouded in secrecy and mystery even to this day. Even if we go back to the stuff at the beginning about what the current conversation is about these kinds of technologies. What are they? Are they a national security threat? And just for instance, with this is pictures from related to this Area 51 that I mentioned, in which you know potentially these experimental aircraft, which are highly classified and top secret and are kept secret, are being developed, and then they sort of exist and they don't exist. And now you see it, now you don't. This is just one example of this. This is an older example, but I think it's still relevant. The stealth bomber here, and the conversation going on now, these things I showed you at the beginning, it does have to do with national security. It's being discussed by the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, of course, and they want to know, is this a kind of technology, whatever it is their personnel or these people are seeing, is it a kind of technology that's leapfrogged, they call it, our own abilities. So here again, I'm wanting to just press on this magical, enchanted quality of a kind of technology that is unexplainable, and that we do not possess the means to construct or explain. And finally, yes, finally, some final takeaway here for me. This is for the way that I'm, what I take away from this, what I want to think about, why it's important for me, and part of it has to do with the crisis of science, the crisis of our contemporary moment, and how to imagine new ways of doing science, new ways of doing art also, and particularly how something like religion and science, spirituality and science, art and science, esotericism and science, must these things be somehow contained from one another? How can they interact? Do they interact? Is it normal for them to interact? Is it abnormal for them not to? And so on. So I just wrote here, art itself as a kind of narrative and media, like science needs a narrative in order to be explained and to be clarified. The results, that is, in the data. Esotericism and enchantment have this. They share this. The esotericism frequently is used also in these re-enchantment projects. Esoteric qualities are drawn on. The notion of technology and secrecy. Why, when we have technology and secrecy brought together in this way, does it generate this strange aura of mystery and magic and so forth? And finally, just as a final thought, UFOs, the idea of UFOs, experience of them as the becoming us selves who have completed the process to become. So they are, in fact, a kind of mirror of us who we want to become. But the mirror, of course, can reflect anything that is held in front of it. And this image here that I'm showing you is actually from Steiner. He would draw, when he would lecture, he would draw on the blackboard, and he's talked a lot about this same idea, and he's showing here on the one side the Wissenschaft, or the scientific interpretive approach, the scientific production of knowledge, is the sun above it, so it's the sun force. On the other side, he has Kunst, or art, and it looks obviously more feminine figure with the moon. So he's sort of working with these gender binaries here to think about bringing these two forces, these two ways of knowing together. And so I just think that's very interesting, and perhaps helpful for trying to come up with new new ways, new ideas, new futures. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Aaron. So if people have questions or comments, you can either type in the chat or you can put up your hand. So under the reactions tab, you'll see the hand there, and you put your hand up by pressing it. So Davide?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good evening, everybody. And thank you for this. That was my passion when I was a young university student. All these ufologists and UFO matters, and I really this your speech really opened a gate that I didn't know totally. But it sounds interesting. Hi Vivian. This It sounds interesting that the interpretation of the interdimensional beings coming from another dimension, because it's exactly the same interpretation made by Muslim theologists about this phenomenon. This phenomenon, maybe nobody not everybody is aware of that, but this phenomenon is interest even Muslim fuqaha, mullahs, ayatollahs, and this great mufti, and they produced some books about it. And normally they used to classify this type of experience like the presence of the jinn. They call this this is jinn. So for Muslim is a very simple explanation. These are the jinns. The Quran say jinns exist, and they interact with us somehow. So there's nothing to fear, because it's normal, it's natural. And the Steinerian and the Hynek interpretation is beside in this the hypothesis of the presence of other intelligence that are not physical. We cannot interact every day like a normal human being, but they exist, and sometimes they show themselves in some way. No, but by the way, thank you. And
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and respond if it's okay. Thank you very much for your comment. It's very interesting. Of course, I've thought about what you've said as well. The idea of UFO, the phenomenon, whatever it is, being related to the concept of jinn in the Islamic traditions. And of course, it is interesting that Islam does have a place for these beings already. So it is, when I speak to Muslims about this, sometimes it is more, like you said, like it can just be kind of filed away more easily into this category because it's built into the framework. Whereas when you have these Western scientists trying to come up with some concept to contain these experiences, they are go to great pains and great lengths to try to do this. The only like way that I would maybe see something interesting in that respect is that, you know, you couldn't do this, but you in a very general sense, if we thought about the jinn and in the Islamic traditions, and something like the elemental beings in these more Western esoteric traditions, the fact that Hynek is in one of these quotes thinking about the possibility that this phenomena is representative of these elemental forces manifesting as beings or something, that there's something interesting there, that maybe he's going in that direction, because of course the jinn were created from fire, whereas the humans are created from clay. So there is this sort of elemental quality in them. But you're absolutely right. Thank you for your comment.
So Crawford has said in the chat, thank you. And why do you think the US Navy footage received so little attention in mainstream media, given the fact that it looked so plausible and relevant authorities could not explain it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, throughout, a lot has happened. First of all, in the last, I think this is part of it, in the last 2, 3 years, 4 or 5 years, even, especially in the United States, like a lot has happened. That this is just one more thing that has seemed to like be part of this onslaught. But I think that's only part of it. I think another part of it is because it was so taboo for so long that there's this like built-in mechanism not to engage with it, not to take it seriously, even when, like the stuff I tried to point out was they're drafting legislation about this now, so uh, even when it gets to that level, of course, the military can just jump on board. When the military thinks there's any possibility of a threat, it doesn't care if there's been a taboo about whatever the hell the threat's coming from. It just goes for it. But media, reputation, scholars, it's much more difficult to approach the subject. I think that's also part of what I think. Maybe you put these two things together and you start to get some kind of explanation.
So Charlie says in the chat, thank you from the Gothenium. Sorry, chat's moved there. Charlie says, I work at the weekly journal here and have been researching an article in this vein for a while. And he says that your presentation was very helpful and asks if you're publishing the paper somewhere or if you can get notes from you.
Yeah, I haven't planned on publishing it yet. I would also like to read your article, whatever it comes out. So maybe, yeah, send me an email and we can exchange some notes. I haven't planned to publish it yet, partly because it's such a sprawling, kind of broad topic. I wanted to present it at this conference, and I do want to write about it, but I'm still trying to figure out how, especially from the framework of religious studies where I come from, how exactly to write about it. But please, you can find me in Erfurt website, religious studies. You could send me an email. I'd love to correspond.
So my chat is frozen, sorry, but Vivian posted in the chat there saying that there was a lot of coverage last year in the UK mainstream media, and she's linked to an article, newspaper article, I think, UFOs are real and are out there, says former spy chief, and another one, the headline, the Pentagon thinks UFOs may exist after all, and the evidence is growing, from the Telegraph in the UK. So the next question is Zainab.
Hi, thank you very much, Aaron, and great to see you after so long. So just to comment, I would say, so UFOs are, obviously they are very interesting for, so many people, but I think there is another way to look at how we find these things so interesting and how you can, relate it to why government, US government is taking interest in it. Is like, I mean, just like, why and when the US government or any kind of government who has, a monopoly over technology to kind of study all of these phenomena, um, decides to do it. And obviously it was during the pandemic, I guess, back in the Trump era. So what do you think? Are there any, kind of political motives just to distract the public from, the real stuff happening around the world? Because, when it comes to governments, it's like it becomes more serious somehow because you don't really have any other source to go to. Like these scientists talking about UFOs. At one time, the government they decide to, kind of hush them, and then other times, when it suits them, it's like okay, they really exist, but you cannot really verify that. So, what do you really think about that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Thank you also for being here, Zainab. Of course, we have talked about this in the gin also, but that's a really good question, and I didn't. Of course, I know about that, and I didn't bring it in here because that's the controversial question that you ask. And if one goes into the UFO conversation, there is a whole section that believes that this whole thing is a kind of diversion process, a kind of disinformation campaign. So you get like groups who really believe it, and then you get groups who are very suspicious, both interested in the phenomenon, and think that it's being are going on.
I think you froze there for a moment, Aaron.
Oh, sorry.
Just for like about 10 seconds.
Okay, can you hear me again?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. I was just saying that the question you ask is very good because it's the controversial question, in that there in these UFO communities, there are like people who believe it and want to take it seriously, and then there are others who are also interested in UFOs who see it as a big disinformation campaign in some way. That there is some element of it that seems contrived or constructed, and that's trying to distract people from whatever geopolitical things are happening, whatever the military wants people to think about, whatever kinds of technology they have or not. So I definitely think that that element is in play. I don't think it's all that, but I do think that is something that is part of it, not just in the U.S. Like this, like you said, this would be anywhere. But that's what's for me so interesting about technology and in the military, because the military is using these advanced technologies, then they're constructing these kind of spells of mystery and deception to sort of to divert attention and to make people believe other narratives, so that the secrets of this technology is not let out. And that whole thread is through the current conversation going on now even. So yeah, I think it's kind of a mix. For instance, what you said, a lot of people have touched on this, that the fact that it has been a taboo subject this whole time, and now suddenly very prominent politicians in the US are now all very interested in it and talking about it all the time. This to many people is kind of red flag. So I don't have an answer, but I think there's sort of two different things at work in here, and that's clearly one of them. Trying to get control of the interpretation and the narrative of what these experiences are.
Yeah, it also depends that where it is taboo, because in my part of the world it's not really taboo. So yeah.
Right. So very US. I mean, in the UK it sounds like too, but I focused on the US. In the US, it's a very very big issue currently.
So final question from Sue.
Hi, thanks, Aaron. At last I get to hear your paper, hurrah! Yeah, I think it's very interesting what you're saying about the two camps, as it were, the military and the other ways of looking at this. And I think this is where we need to go now, because I know reading in Valley's diaries, he identified a long time ago that the narrative is controlled as a threat because it's getting funding from the military complex, as it were, and it was part of the Cold War narrative that suited sort of Western thinking very much at the time. What I think is so interesting is the work that Valley started to do in the sort of 60s and 70s, linking this much more into the enchanted universe, if you will. And now what's beginning to happen with Kripal and Pasulka and other thinkers is just so freighted with so much possibility, I think, of us taking it away from all of that. Because the way I've been looking at this over the last goodness knows how many years, we've been waiting for something to come down and bash us on the head from Alpha Centauri. It ain't happened yet. I don't think it's going to. But what would be your thoughts about how we can take it back into the humanities and then look at this from a different angle and really give us this extra kind of power, if you will, in order to make it work?
Yeah, wonderful. That's a really good question. Thank you also for your comments and for being here for the talk. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm interested in. What is interesting, I guess, also right now is you have both still happening. Like you have the work of Pasulka and Kripal and people trying to frame this whole thing in a certain way, but you still have also the national security sort of military threat narrative about threats from the sky, threats from space, satellite, drones, that goes on. So the two are still kind of a parallel. What I think is different is in this Cold War era, you didn't have the Kripal, Pasulka people, working. So that is a new part of it, I think. So that is quite encouraging also for me. And that's why I follow, to a certain extent, the approach that they're going on. It's also why I would try to pull it into religious studies, because I do think that within religious studies, this is probably where we should be. It's not necessarily a theological problem, but it is a religious-y, spiritually type of problem. And I think it should be pulled into there with the science to and try to think through it that way, which is of course what Kreipel and Sokol are also doing.
I think it is one of the most important topics that we should be looking at now as scholars and in general. I'm aware of that there is a lot of grassroots interest in this. I'm aware of a group locally that's been doing some really interesting information sharing over about the last, I don't know, 10 years or so. Everyday people sharing their experiences way under the radar of anything, never published or anything. And the changes in people's experience of life, their beliefs, their perceptions, their understanding of reality, there is such a kind of consonance amongst all of it, no matter how many disparate experiences people have. And that thing at you know, the thing where cattle move and this sort of phenomenon, it's repeated so frequently as actual events that people are witnessing that there is something incredibly important happening that's way beyond the Cold War, I think. So
right.
The more we can get into this, I think it can only benefit the whole of the way we express consciousness.
Absolutely. And one thing I would just highlight there that you touched on, which is also my experience as I move into this, is this, which is what the other conference was about, is you have to go into the experiencer realm in order to do this. So it does take a kind of some crossover work between quote unquote scholar and practitioner, for lack of a better pair of words there, but it requires that, which also then challenges the whole assumptions of the academy in the first place once you start doing that. So when you really start to pull this problem apart, it does become bigger and bigger and more relevant and important. It's quite interesting.
It is, it's fascinating. Thank you.
So just to end with that, following on from what you've said, Sue, and Davide Amore has said in the chat, I'm happy that you can face this topic at an academic level, and says that when he was a student, if you only dared to reference it, you were at risk being fired away. So I think, you know, Western esotericism as a subfield has really opened discussion, like opportunities for academics to research this and to build knowledge on these religious communities and philosophical ideas. So thank you, Aaron, for your talk, and this was really interesting. So I will just stop the recording.